Breaking, Nas and Benzino didn't just pull up to a live stream, they came armed, locked and loaded, like it was the hip-hop version of Game of Thrones and Jim Jones. Let's just say he didn't make it to the next season. This wasn't a clapback. This wasn't a diss. This was a televised public execution in 4K with the comment section acting as the firing squad. Do you ever watch a man's entire career get set on fire while 800 people throw gasoline in real time? Oh, you're about to. Because in 1 hour, the so-called Harlem diplomat got stripped of his title. His receipts got aired like a Netflix documentary, and his Street King image got dragged through the mud so hard it's now unrecognizable. But here's the thing. Was this really just a random beef? Or has this takedown been years in the making? Were Nas and Benzino lying in wait, collecting dirt like it was a loyalty card, just waiting to cash in all at once? And why? Oh, why? Did Jim think he could survive throwing shade at two men who treat grudges like fine wine? Tonight, we're not just spilling tea, we're burning the whole cafe down. Buckle up. This is about to get ugly. They say the internet moves fast, but last night it did not just move. It exploded, and the shockwaves had one name in the center of it. All Jim Jones, and what happened was not some casual shade or a playful back and forth. It was a calculated public dismantling done live in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers, with two men steering the ship like they had been planning this. Hit for years, and those two men were Nas, the lyrical king of Queensbridge, who rarely steps into petty drama unless it is about to become historical, and Benzino, the unapologetic loose cannon of hip-hop commentary who has never met a controversy. He could not make messier, and their target was a man who has spent decades walking around Harlem with the self-appointed title of king without ever showing the receipts that prove he earned it. And the beauty or the horror, depending on where you stand, was that this did not come out of nowhere. This was the culmination of years of subtle digs, backstage whispers, and questionable alliances that had been quietly rotting under the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to blow up and last. That moment came in the form of a casual-looking live stream with 2 mics, 2 drinks, and 0 mercy. The night started with light banter, the kind that makes you think, maybe this will just be a friendly conversation, but you could feel it in the air that they were circling their prey. And then Nas leaned forward into the camera with that calm, almost bored expression he gets when he knows he is about to end someone's narrative, and said the line that is already going down as one of the most lethal verbal shots in live stream history. Some people think they are kings of the culture, when really they are just court jesters with good Wi-Fi, and there was no need to say the name because the chat exploded with Jim like. A courtroom full of people yelling guilty, and before the dust could settle, Benzino, who was sipping like a man with nothing to lose, reached down and pulled up a manila folder, so worn it looked like it had been waiting for this exact moment, and he began reading exhibits out loud like he was in front of a jury. He started with screenshots of text messages allegedly between Jim and a certain Def Jam executive, where Jim was apparently feeding them numbers designed to tank Cameron's leverage in a Roc Nation deal. Then came an audio clip where a voice that sounded exactly like Jim could be heard dismissing charity work as nothing but PR nonsense, the kind of clip that makes your stomach drop if it is you in the recording. And as if that was not enough, Benzino delivered what he called the final nail, a grainy, time-stamped photo from 2014 allegedly showing Jim at an intimate dinner with a man he had publicly sworn to never associate with again, the kind of betrayal that in Harlem lore is not just bad business, it is personal treason. The viewer count on the stream skyrocketed from a solid 80,000 to over 300,000 in less than 10 minutes as these receipts rolled out, with Twitter memes and TikTok edits already being posted before Benzino even finished his sentences. And Nas was not about to let him have all the fun. He went for the jugular by calling out what he termed the myth of Terrio and the myth of Kami. explaining in detail how Jim's career was not built off lyrical dominance or even consistent hits, but on a carefully orchestrated series of public feuds, designed to coincide perfectly with merchandise drops and album rollouts. Nas claimed there was even a document nicknamed the Ops Spreadsheet, a Google Doc template allegedly used by Jim's camp for staging beef, complete with hashtags, talking points, and target names. And sure enough, Benzino tilted the folder toward the camera, and there was Nas's name sitting under a tab labeled Plan B, as if Jim had been planning a feud with him for the clout if Plan A fell through and the chat lost its mind. The donations and super chats flooded in. People were typing confessions about how they always suspected Jim was playing chess with fake drama, while others refused to believe any of it, claiming it was a deepfake smear campaign orchestrated by jealous rivals. But Nas and Benzino just let the chaos swirl without denying a single detail. Instead, Nas doubled down, describing late-night calls he allegedly received years ago from mutual friends, warning him to watch his back because Jim was telling people he was washed and irrelevant, and how that same week a random tabloid article appeared hinting at a Nas versus Jim beef that seemed to come out of thin air, and the implication was clear that Jim himself had planted it to bait Nas into reacting, but Nas did not bite at the time, choosing to file it away for a rainy day. And last night was the storm. This was not just gossip. This was character assassination dressed up as investigative journalism with the perfect mix of old-school beef energy and modern-day viral spectacle. And as the minutes ticked by, you could sense the tension rising, not just on the stream, but in the streets. People in Harlem were apparently FaceTiming each other, reacting live with the stream playing in the background as if it was a heavyweight title fight in real time. Meanwhile, Benzino was savoring every second, adding little side comments like, "I told y'all about this man back in '09, and laughing in that slow, deliberate way that makes you feel like he knows even more than he is telling, but is saving it for later." Nas finally paused, took a slow sip of his drink, looked straight into the camera, and said the thing that made everyone stop scrolling: "There are some crowns in this game that were stolen, not earned. And we just showed you the fingerprints." And with that line, the chat erupted again, and the screen was filled with fire emojis, snake emojis, and every kind of insult you can imagine being hurled at Jim Jones in real time, and just when you thought it could not get any worse. Benzino hinted that there was still more in the folder that had not been shown yet, and the stream was only halfway done. Benzino leaned back with that slow, satisfied smirk, as if he was holding back the kind of detail that could set the whole industry on fire, and the chat knew it too, because the comment section became a battlefield with people screaming for him to spill everything and others begging him to stop before this went too far. But if you know Benzino, you know there is no such thing as too far, and Nas was egging him on like a hype man who also happened to be one of the greatest rappers alive. The manila folder was still sitting there in front of Benzino, like a loaded weapon, and he tapped it twice for dramatic effect before sliding out what looked like a printed email chain with subject lines so incriminating the camera could barely focus without catching words like payoff, silence, and press leak. And he claimed these were from 2016, involving Jim's alleged deal with a certain streaming platform to suppress negative press about a failed fashion collaboration. The details were almost cinematic. Benzino reading how a writer was allegedly offered an exclusive sneaker drop and cash to kill a story about vendors not getting paid then. Nas chimed in saying he had heard whispers of that very scandal, but back then no one dared publish because Jim's camp was known for sending what Nas described as the midnight visitors, who would show up at your door with smiles and thinly veiled threats. And while that might sound like old-school street myth, Benzino claimed he had a voicemail from an ex-assistant who described being told to book last-minute flights for 2 associates whenever a reporter started asking the wrong questions. The tension in the live stream was electric. Viewers were screen recording every second because they knew clips of this were going to be replayed for months, and the whole time, Benzino kept dropping little asides about the photo and the list as if there were still bigger bombs waiting too. Drop, and then without warning, he pulled out what he called the Harlem Ledger, a handwritten notebook allegedly from one of Jim's former Inner Circle members. It was filled with dates, names, dollar amounts, and cryptic notes like Duncan meeting, cover story, and green light from up top. And while no one could prove its authenticity on the spot, Nas treated it like gospel reading off lines with a kind of calm, surgical tone that made it feel like each word was cutting deeper into whatever public image Jim had left. The audience could barely keep up. The chat was moving so fast that half the accusations were being buried in real time, but nothing could hide the fact that the receipts were stacking higher by the minute. And then Benzino went for a different angle. He started talking about loyalty, or rather the lack of it, in Jim's career, pointing out how many alliances he had publicly sworn by only to abandon. Then when it suited him, he brought up a story about a benefit concert where Jim allegedly kept a performance fee for himself while telling the other artists the payment fell through, and Nas followed that by describing an industry dinner where Jim spent the night trashing one of his own Dipset brothers to a table full of executives who were laughing at the gossip like it was free entertainment. It was not just about shady deals anymore. It was about painting a picture of a man who would burn any bridge if he thought there was a payday. On the other side, the chat started posting snake emojis by the thousands, and people were digging up old interviews to see. There had been hidden signs all along, and then Nas delivered a gut punch. He said there were rumors of a vault in Jim's penthouse, not a literal bank vault, but a hidden closet stacked with files, recordings, and photos collected over the years to use as leverage against anyone who crossed him. And Benzino swore he had seen a glimpse of it during a studio session years ago, claiming there were boxes labeled with names, some of which were still very active in the industry. This set off a whole new round of speculation, because if that vault existed, it meant Jim was not just playing the game, he was playing it with blackmail as his currency. And Nas made sure to drive the point home, saying this is why certain people never check him in public. They know he's holding something that could end them. The energy on the stream was unlike anything else. It was equal parts scandal and spectacle, with the two hosts weaving between direct accusations and cryptic hints like master storytellers. And just when it felt like maybe they had reached the limit, Benzino dropped the line that froze the entire chat. We haven't even touched the family stuff yet, and you could feel the collective gasp through the screen, because in this world, going after someone's personal life is crossing into no return territory. Nas raised an eyebrow, like he was not sure if they should go there, but Benzino, already halfway in, describing a long-running rumor that a major falling out inside Jim's own household had been quietly covered up by paying off multiple people, including a neighbor who allegedly witnessed a blowout that ended with police at the door, but no report filed. And while Benzino kept saying allegedly every few sentences, it was clear he was presenting this as something more than street gossip. The super chats pouring in were now in all caps, telling them to keep going, to not stop for anyone. Nas glanced at the viewer count, which had broken 400,000 live, and shook his head with that smirk that says he knew this was going to be the moment that would be replayed forever. The two of them fed off the chaos like pros, Benzino reading another snippet from what he called a friend-turned-witness, describing how certain public feuds Jim had were actually rehearsed weeks in advance, with fake confrontations staged in clubs just so paparazzi would catch them. And Nas added his own story about turning down an offer from a promoter who admitted Jim had asked him to float a false rumor about Nas being late to shows just to build tension before a festival booking. Every detail piled on to the growing image of someone who was not just caught in one scandal, but who lived inside a machine built entirely on manufactured conflict, manipulation, and power plays. And as Benzino closed the folder for the first time since the stream began, there was this heavy pause, like the air had gone out of the room. But instead of cooling things down, Nas leaned forward and said the 5 words that made it clear they were just getting started. Let's talk about the money, and the chat immediately exploded again. Nas leaned in like he was about to read the final chapter of a thriller that everyone thought was fiction until it started sounding too real, and he said, "The money trail was where people always slipped up because you can hide text messages, you can deny phone calls, but you cannot erase transactions without leaving fingerprints somewhere," and Benzino was nodding with the kind of grin that told you he had already traced those fingerprints and found the hand they belonged to. He started talking about a string of shell companies registered in states Jim had never even performed in, and how each one seemed to have a purpose that made no sense on paper, from luxury car rentals that owned no cars to event promotion firms that never booked a single artist. Benzino claimed these companies were funnels moving cash from endorsement deals that never officially hit Jim's public accounts straight into private investments and offshore spots that only insiders knew how to access. Nas backed him up, saying he had seen a similar setup with other big names, but never this many layers, like Jim had built a spider web so tangled even the IRS would need a GPS to find its way through it. The chat was eating it up, throwing out conspiracy theories faster than the hosts could read them, some insisting this was just standard music industry behavior and others swearing this was mafia-level laundering. And then Benzino hit them with a story about a Miami property deal where Jim allegedly put down a massive cash deposit on a penthouse under an alias using a middleman, who later turned out to be under federal investigation for unrelated fraud. Nas shook his head and said, if that's true, then Jim's people are either reckless or arrogant, because nothing makes investigators hungrier than finding an unregistered high-value asset in a name that does not match the income stream on file. The more they talked, the darker the picture became. Benzino, reading from what he claimed was a bank insider's anonymous email breaking down withdrawals in odd round numbers, just under reporting thresholds spread across multiple accounts, like someone was deliberately staying beneath the radar, and Nas added that in his experience, these patterns were not random, they were the calling card of someone who has been coached on how to avoid detection, which begged the question, who was doing the coaching and why did Jim feel the need for it? The chat was spamming fire emojis, like the screen was about to combust, and Benzino took a long sip of water like a man pacing himself for the final blow. Then he brought up the missing cut story, a rumor that certain collaborators over the years had quietly complained about not receiving their agreed shares of tour profits, but chose not to go public because they were afraid of being blacklisted. And Nas said he had heard it too from people who were far from enemies of Jim. In fact, they had defended him in public only to vent in private about checks that never arrived. And then Benzino leaned forward and said, this is where it gets personal, because money is one thing, but trust is another, and once that's gone, it's not coming back. He claimed that a former friend had told him about a night in Vegas where an entire crew confronted Jim over what they believed was a six-figure sum that had vanished from a joint venture account. And instead of explaining or denying, Jim allegedly laughed and told them to consider it a lesson. The weight of that story hung in the air for a few seconds before Nas broke it with a sharp comment about how power makes some people feel untouchable until the ground shifts under them, and Benzino was quick to point out that the ground might already be moving, because according to his sources, there were at least two separate inquiries quietly gathering material, one from tax authorities and another from a state-level fraud unit, and while no official charges had been filed, the fact that anyone was even looking was enough to change the energy around Jim's name in certain circles. Nas said that if half of what they were hearing was true, then the only thing keeping it from exploding publicly was timing. And timing is unpredictable when you have enemies waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Benzino grinned and said enemies were the least of his worries, because sometimes the biggest hits come from people sitting right next to you. The chat froze at that, and Nas raised an eyebrow, clearly knowing there was more, and Benzino did not disappoint. He claimed there was a person inside Jim's current circle feeding information to someone on the outside, and that this person had been in the Room for major decisions, including deals that could now be considered questionable if the investigations picked up speed. Nas said that if that mole existed, then Jim's empire was already cracking from within, and Benzino nodded, saying the hardest. Part 4 Men Like Him is realizing the betrayal was bought cheap, probably for less than what they spent on a single night out in the club. The live stream felt like it was in slow motion, now every word loaded with the kind of weight that makes. You feel like you're watching history bend in real time, and then Nas delivered the kind of closing shot that makes you realize this story was never about just one man. He said the industry breeds this, it rewards the ones who can play dirty while smiling clean and then act shocked when the dirt finally floats to the surface, and Benzino chuckled, saying, well, the surface is looking pretty murky right now, and maybe it's about to get even darker. The chat was begging for more details, but the two of them leaned back like they had already given the world more than it was ready to handle, and with one last smirk, Benzino said, keep your eyes open, because when the first headline hits, it will not just be about music, it will be about the empire behind it and the cracks running all the way through. So now you've heard it all, or at least as much as we can say without every lawyer in the city blowing up our phones, but let's be real. This story is far from over. In fact, we might just be standing at the edge of something way bigger, because if half the whispers we're hearing start showing up in official reports, then you can bet this little live stream moment will be remembered as the night the first domino tipped. And here's the thing, you don't want to be the person catching up after the headlines hit. You want to be here from the jump with the receipts, the theories, and the breakdowns before the mainstream scrambles to cover it. So if you want the unfiltered play-by-play, the parts they'll never put on TV, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button so the algorithm knows you're not here for the watered-down version. Drop your wildest theory in the comments so we can see just how deep you think this rabbit hole goes, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on those notifications, because when the next leak drops, you're going to want to be in the room the moment it happens.